Prologue. Curse of Grimford. Once upon a time, long before Grimford became a normal, quiet town, there were people who worshipped forces that had no names. They believed that the world was only a shadow of what was hidden in the darkness, and that immortality could be gained by finding the right path to these dark forces. The brotherhood that these people founded consisted of the chosen ones, the most influential and the wisest. They gathered in secret places far from human eyes and performed rituals, seeking to open the gates to another world. According to legend, they once managed to summon something from this darkness. It was a creature that had no form but possessed mighty power. It offered the Brotherhood what they sought: knowledge, power, and immortality. But his gift came at a high price. It was a sacrifice they didn't expect. The Brotherhood was to sacrifice not bodies, but souls. The souls of all who had ever lived and would live in Grimford. The Brotherhood agreed, and from then on, darkness became a part of the city. They hid the artifact that was used during the ritual in a dungeon under the church, and with it they placed a powerful force that protected it from prying eyes. But the creature they summoned was not satisfied with its lot. It wanted more. It wanted to rule the whole city. It took the form of a clown, a creature that struck fear into people's hearts, but looked innocent and playful. This clown, known as Pierrot of Darkness, brought with him a circus that became a harbinger of disasters and disappearances. People came to his performances, laughed and had fun, not suspecting that their souls were already doomed. Over the years, the city began to forget its curse, but the darkness never completely disappeared. She was waiting for her time to come back and devour Grimford once and for all. And so, one day, when the inhabitants of the city began to forget about ancient stories and legends, a circus appeared on the main square. Its large, colourful tents, bright lanterns, and cheerful music quickly attracted people's attention, but no one knew that it was the beginning of the end. In the shadows of the night, when the city fell asleep, Piero of Darkness prepared his last, most terrible act. And only those with pure hearts and enough courage could stop him before the city is forever lost in darkness. Part 1. The Abandoned Circus. In the small town of Grimford, which is stuck somewhere in the middle of the last century, time seems to have stopped. The town was quiet, with ancient buildings standing amidst the dense forest that surrounded it on all sides. The only source of news and communication with the rest of the world was a small radio in a local shop. The people of Grimford were used to a quiet, slow life, until one autumn night, when a thick fog covered the whole town, they heard a strange sound coming from the forest. It was the sound of an old circus organ. It was both eerie and magnetic, like a call from another world. In the morning, the news spread in the city that someone had seen an old circus tent appear in the middle of the forest. This did not happen before. No one was warned. There were no posters or announcements. The tent simply appeared, like a ghost from the past, in a small clearing among the trees. Local residents, despite their fear, were full of curiosity. Who brought the circus to their town? And why? Who are the people who work there? All these questions did not give rest. When night fell, the townspeople began to gather around the tent. The entrance was open, but no one could be seen inside. The tent poles stretched upwards, dissolving in the darkness, but the light of the lamps hanging on the poles flickered, adding an ominous touch to the atmosphere. Then he appeared from the darkness, a clown. Tall, with long, slender arms and legs. His face was as pale as canvas, with a large red smile painted on it that didn't match his eyes, which were empty and soulless. He was dressed in an old circus costume, torn and stained, as if it had been through thousands of performances. The clown didn't say a word. He only looked at the crowd, and that look made the heart shrink with terror. Everyone knew something was wrong, but couldn't look away. Then he gestured to the people to enter the tent. Those who dared to enter saw something terrible. The stage was empty, but it was surrounded by mirrors. Each mirror reflected something different. Someone saw missing body parts in the reflection. Someone saw themselves old and sick. And someone saw the images of long-dead relatives standing behind them and staring at them with empty eyes. The clown continued to watch in silence as the people unfolded to exit. Some of them could not stand it and ran out of the tent, stumbling as they went. Others, on the contrary, were attracted by the eerie atmosphere, feeling that as soon as they stepped out, something terrible would happen to them. But no one noticed how the tent door closed by itself when the last people were inside. The clown came to the stage and stood in the center. An old circus bell appeared in his hands, which he rang 3 times, and those who appeared in them began to emerge from the mirrors. These were not just reflections. They became solid, material, but with distorted, terrible features. These creatures approached those who dared to stay, and began to take them one by one into the darkness of the mirrors. No one knew what happened to those people. But the next morning, the circus tent disappeared as mysteriously as it appeared. But the same clown that now roamed the streets of Grimford remained in the town. He didn't speak, he didn't laugh, he just walked silently, his shadow chasing anyone who tried to escape. And when someone was alone in a dark corner, he appeared next to them and pulled them into the darkness from which no one came back. Part 2. Grimford Mysteries. The people of Grimford awoke the next morning with a strange sense of unease. Everyone who dared to go to the circus last night was silent. They seemed to have lost the ability to speak, and their eyes were empty as if their souls had left their bodies. Their relatives and friends tried to find out what happened, but they just hid from the light and refused any contact. However, one young girl named Lisa decided she couldn't leave it unanswered. She was one of the few who didn't go to the circus that night, but her best friend Sarah disappeared and Lisa felt she had to find out the truth. Lisa remembered the old urban legends her grandmother had told her when she was little. One of them was the story about the ghost clown. Grandma always said that this is not just a fairy tale for children. She assured that once upon a time there really was a circus in this city which disappeared without a trace many years ago. And several residents of the city disappeared with him. Lisa decided to visit the old city archive, which was located in the basement of the library. She found old newspapers that mentioned the circus. This circus was famous for the fact that its performances always ended with strange disappearances. But in the 1920s, the circus disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. The girl also found a reference to a mysterious clown called Piero the Dark. He was the main star of the circus, and people said that his gaze could mesmerize anyone. According to the legend, he was not just a man, he was the embodiment of an ancient evil that lived in the shadows and fed on fear and despair. Lisa decided to go to the place where the circus once stood. It was an old clearing in the forest where tall trees now grew. But when she got there, she saw something incredible. Despite the old trees, the center of the clearing remained empty, like a huge circle, inside which nothing grew. The place smelled of ancient evil. Suddenly, Lisa heard someone laughing behind her. She turned, and standing before her was Piero of Darkness. His smile was as big and terrifying as the pictures in the old newspapers, but this time his eyes glowed with a red light, as if a fire was burning inside. "I knew you would come," he said in his deep and cold voice. "You were looking for me, and now you will find more than you wanted." Liza tried to run away, but her legs seemed to grow into the ground. The clown approached her and reached out, touching her forehead. She felt the world begin to change around her, darkness engulfing the meadow. And she herself was transported to another world, a world where time and space did not exist. She ended up in a giant circus tent with thousands of mirrors. In each of them, she saw her reflection, but it was distorted, like in a nightmare. Piero of Darkness appeared before her again and laughed sinisterly. "You have entered my kingdom, little Liza," he said. "This is where your fears become reality. You will never leave this place until you face your deepest fear." Lisa realized that her only way to salvation was to overcome her greatest fear. She remembered that her grandmother had once told her about the mirror of truth, which can show you what you fear most, but also help you overcome that fear. She began to search for this mirror among hundreds of others. Her heart was beating so hard that it seemed all she could hear was its pounding. Finally, she found a mirror standing in the corner of the tent, behind an old torn curtain. This mirror was different from the others. Its surface was smooth, like a black lake on a moonless night. Lisa approached it and looked inside. She saw herself, but it was not a simple reflection. She saw herself as a lonely girl standing in an empty house, hearing someone calling her name, but unable to find where the voice was coming from. It was her fear, the fear of being alone, lost in a world where no one could find her. A clown stood nearby and watched her. This is a reflection of you, Lisa. Can you accept it and overcome it? She knew she had to gather all her will. She looked into the eyes of her reflection and realized that this fear was only a part of herself, and she had to accept it. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. At the same moment, the mirror crumbled into small pieces, and Lisa found herself on the lawn again. Piero the Dark was gone, but she knew he would return. She became stronger, but there were still challenges ahead. When Lisa returned to the city, she saw that she was not the only one who had changed. Those who came out of the tent that terrible day began to return to life, gradually recovering their memories. But the circus was still standing, and in its darkness lurked a new danger. Part 3: Mysterious Connections. After Lisa returned to the city, she began to notice that something had changed not only in her, but also in Grimford itself. The city now seemed even quieter, and its inhabitants became more silent, as if something oppressed their souls. Lisa understood that the evil that came with the circus had not yet been defeated. It was waiting for its moment. Lisa knew she needed help, so she decided to turn to the only person who might have the answers: old priest Father Matthew. He lived on the outskirts of the city in an old house near the church, surrounded by dead trees. Father Matthew was known for his wisdom and knew many of the city's secrets, passed down to him from his ancestors. As Lisa knocked on the door, she heard heavy footsteps coming from inside. The door opened and an old, wrinkled man with deep, penetrating eyes appeared in the doorway. "Lisa, I knew you'd come," he said, inviting her inside. They sat down in the small living room, where on the walls hung old pictures of scenes from the Bible, but they were all darkened, as if they had lost their colors from age. "Father Matthew, I don't know where to begin," Lisa began, telling him about everything that happened, about the strange circus, about the clown, and how she met her reflection in the mirror. The old man listened attentively, without interrupting her. When she finished, he pulled an old book covered in dust from the shelf and placed it in front of her. "This is not the first time the city has faced this threat," he began. "The circus you speak of has come here before. Its origins are lost in the darkness of time, but there is one fact that always repeats itself. It brings with it destruction and the disappearance of people." Lisa carefully opened the book and saw ancient notes and drawings. There were images of the same clown, but under different names: Piero of Darkness, Sad Joker, Prince of Laughter. Each of these names was accompanied by a description of the disasters that occurred in the cities after its appearance. All these disasters were associated with strange disappearances and unexpected deaths. But why did he come back now? Lisa asked, feeling a cold fear inside her. "It's not just a coincidence," Father Matthew replied. "There is a force that has awakened him. And that force may be connected to ancient rituals that were performed here in Grimford many years ago. We must find the root of this evil to figure out how to stop it." Father Matthew explained that there was once a brotherhood in Grimford that worshipped ancient powers, hoping to gain power and immortality. They performed dark rituals in the dungeons beneath the city, trying to summon a being that could give them what they desired. But the ritual went wrong, and they summoned Piero Darkness, who turned out to be not just a spirit, but a being from another dimension that feeds on the fear and pain of people. The only way to stop him is to find and destroy the artifact the Brotherhood used in their ritual, Father Matthew said. This artifact is hidden somewhere in the city, but its location is unknown. But I know who can help us find it. They decided to visit an old fortune teller named Agatha, who lived on the outskirts of the city in an old house with windows that were always covered with heavy curtains. She was known to be able to communicate with spirits and had knowledge of things hidden from ordinary people. As they approached her house, Lisa felt a cold wind rise around her, as if the air itself was responding to their presence. Father Matthew knocked on the door, and it opened on its own, inviting them inside. Agatha was already waiting for them. Her eyes were as dark as the windows of her house, and she knew at once why they had come. "I know what you're looking for," she said, not waiting for questions. "But the artifact is protected by a powerful force, and it will not be easy to find. It was hidden by those who caused this evil, and it is located in a place where worlds intersect." Agatha took Lisa's hand and closed her eyes as if trying to find something in the darkness. "There's a place where they hid him," she said, opening her eyes. "This is an old dungeon under St. Michael's Church. But be careful. There is a lot of evil gathered there, and it guards its secret." Lisa, Father Matthew, and Agatha decided to go to the church that night while the town was still asleep. They knew that time was short, because the circus and its creepy owner would not wait. Pierrot of Darkness had already begun preparing his final act, and they had to stop him before he finished. Part 4. Saint. Michael's Dungeon. The night enveloped Grimford in thick, impenetrable gloom. Lisa, Father Matthew, and Agatha were on their way to St. Michael's Church. The streets were empty, and the wind whistled shrilly through the branches of the old trees, creating an eerie noise like the whispering of shadows. The Church of St. Michael stood on a small hill in the centre of the city. Its massive doors were decorated with old carved patterns that told the story of the struggle between good and evil. But now this door looked neglected, as if no one had stepped through it for a long time. When they entered the church, there was dead silence inside. The candles that should have been burning on the altar had long since gone out, and only the dim light of the moon filtered through the coloured stained glass windows. Their footsteps echoed in the spacious room, adding to the feeling of boundless emptiness. Father Matthew led them to the door that led to the dungeon. It was a small room behind the altar where old books and ritual objects were kept. The door to the dungeon was hidden under a heavy carpet, which was pushed aside to reveal a metal hatch. Agatha whispered a few words in the ancient language, and the hatch slowly opened, letting in a cold, musty wind from the dungeon. Inside was a darkness that seemed alive, as if something was waiting for them in that darkness. "Be careful," Agatha warned. "What awaits us below is not just a trap, it is a test for each of us." They lit the old lanterns and began to descend the narrow stairs that led deep into the earth. The air grew thicker and heavier, as if they were descending into another world where forgotten forces ruled. The walls of the dungeon were damp and covered with moss, and the sound of dripping water could be heard from them. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, a long, narrow corridor opened up before them, leading to a great hall. This hall was surrounded by old stone columns, between which flickered a faint light coming from an unknown source. In the centre of the hall stood a large altar made of black stone, on which lay an artifact, an ancient amulet surrounded by light. But this light was not ordinary. It pulsated as if it were breathing, and its lustre created a strange sense of unease. "This is the artifact," Father Matthew whispered. "There is much evil associated with it, but now we have the opportunity to destroy it and end this curse." Agatha approached the altar and picked up the amulet. But at the same moment, the darkness in the hall began to move, as if living shadows surrounded them. Silhouettes began to appear from the darkness. They were those who were taken by Piero of Darkness. Their faces were contorted with terror, and their eyes glowed red like a clown's. Lisa realized that they had fallen into a trap. These creatures began to approach them, forming a closed circle. Their steps were silent, and from them blew a chill that penetrated to the very bones. "We must destroy the amulet," cried Agatha, clutching him in her arms. But as soon as she tried to break it, the amulet glowed with a bright light and a dark condensed shadow began to emerge from it. It was something like smoke, but more material, and it began to take shape, that of Piero the Dark. "You thought you could stop me," said the clown with an evil smile. "This is just the beginning." He held out his hand, and the shadows surrounding them began to tighten around them like a dead loop. Lisa felt herself panic, but at the last moment she remembered the mirror of truth. If it helped her once, maybe it will help her now. She decided to use the power of her fear. Lisa looked directly into Piero Dark's eyes and imagined her reflection, her true self. And then a miracle happened. A light began to radiate from her body, which increased with each second. This light dispelled the shadows, and the darkness began to dissolve. "No!" Piero shouted as the light touched him. He tried to escape, but it was in vain. The light engulfed him, and all the shadows that surrounded them disappeared with it. When it was over, the artifact fell to the ground and crumbled into dust. The dungeon was filled with silence, as if nothing had happened. Agatha dropped to her knees, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Father Matthew, barely standing on his feet, crossed himself and thanked God for their salvation. Lisa felt her strength draining away, and she almost passed out, but she knew she had made the right choice. They stopped Piero the Dark, and now the city was safe. They climbed back to the surface, where the dawn was already beginning to peek over the horizon. The first rays of the sun shone on Grimford, and the city seemed to wake up from a long nightmare. People began to go out into the streets, not understanding what exactly had happened, but feeling relieved, as if a heavy cloud had disappeared from the sky. St. Michael's Church was no longer a repository for evil. It once again became a place of light, where residents could find shelter and protection. Lisa, Father Matthew, and Agatha knew that although the battle was won, the darkness would always be there. But now they were ready for her. Here is a story about an evil clown. Write in the comments what you think about this story. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. See you in another story.